Oh, all my fellow gringos, how you going? Ah, cool, good to hear. Well, today's the day. It is my final day in Ecuador. I leave to Peru tonight on an overnight bus, and as such, I thought it was as good as time as any to go over my budget and talk about how much 1 month in Ecuador cost. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight to the total. After a bit of math, arithmetic, pain, sweat and tears, that number of 1 month in Ecuador cost $915 US. So for those playing along at home in Australia, that comes to 1,150 Australian dollars. So it's less than my budget. I'm actually trying to go for under 1,000 US dollars a month, and I've hit that by about $85. So let's jump into what kind of cost me the most and what I spent my money on. Let's start with the accommodation. So I was staying at hostels for the whole month, and over 28 days or so, they average out to about $8 per night. So these are basic rooms you're sharing with 5 other people usually, and the bathrooms can be hit or miss. I've had some with terrible hair in the plug holes, I've had some with taps that fall out, but I've also had some with, you know, working hot water and decent facilities. So it can really depend where you're staying on, but on the whole, I was pretty comfortable. So $8 per night, roughly you should be expecting to spend about 1/4 of all your money on accommodation. So I spent $240 for the month, but that's going to go up or down depending on what you can kind of cope with and kind of get used to. Secondly for me was the food. So as every good backpacker should, I indulged every morning and got up in time for the free breakfast, which is usually, you know, a coffee or some scrambled eggs and some toast. But I kind of indulged a little bit this month, being my first kind of month away, and for both lunch and dinner, or almuerzo y cena as they say in Espanol, I went to restaurants or I went to the central market and bought food. So I kind of averaged it out and found that most of the meals in the central market are about $3. If you're going to a restaurant, a budget restaurant, it's going to be about $5 or $6. And over every day I found out that I was spending $7 purely on food every day. So whether that's going to the central market and getting yapping nachos, or going to the local Colombian place and getting a few arepas, even going to the market and getting some avocados and buying some bread with it, you should expect to spend about $7 or $8 per day. Again, for yourself, that's going to depend on what you want to eat, what you can live with, but yeah, for me, for the month, roughly $200 is what I was spending my food allowance on. Add to that the drink allowance. So it wasn't alcohol for me that killed me, it was the coffee. In terms of alcohol, I didn't drink that much, but you can get a good beer or a decent beer for $2. It was the coffee. Every day getting a $1.50 to $4 coffee can really sting your budget. I didn't expect to spend $50 on coffee, but here I am at the end of the month with that much money gone. So going forward, I'm definitely going to spend a lot less on coffee, presumably a lot more on alcohol in Peru, but hopefully it evens out. I think for food and drink generally I can definitely cut down costs, but overall it is what it is, and I'm happy with my first month on that. Next is the transport, so your buses and your taxis. A rule of thumb for buses going between city and little town in Ecuador is $1 US per hour. So it's pretty affordable, and most of the buses have Wi-Fi, they're air conditioned, they recline, so I was happy to also pay that. I did basically from Quito to Cuenca and everywhere in between on buses, and it cost me, let's see, $50 for the month to travel the whole country by bus. It's pretty good. Further than that, it's the taxis. So if it's late at night and you don't feel safe, or you've got your big backpack and you just need to get to the hostel, $1 or $2 here or there. So for me it was $20, and I also split with friends a lot, so it's pretty convenient to catch taxis. Now lastly, the thing that you've got to consider is your activities. So again, this will vary hugely from person to person and what you're interested in. But for me, I only did the things that I thought were worth it, or you kind of get your bang for your buck. So one of the largest bang for your bucks things for me was the Kilauea Loop, which I maintain is one of the best things I've done in Ecuador. It was roughly $60 to $80, depending how you do it, for 3 days of hiking in the Andes. So amazing food, great hostels on the way, you don't even have to take camping stuff. I've done a video on this before, but that for me maintains, or is still one of the best activities I did in this country. Furthermore, I also did a video on it. I'm doing videos on bloody everything. The Isla de la Plata tour, that was $35. I maintain that was worth it because I'm never going to do that again. Something that wasn't worth it was a cooking class I did here in Cuenca. Fair enough, now I can make tamales, but for $35 over one morning, it's a bit steep for your money. Lastly was just getting bikes in Baños, $5 here or there for a few small activities. Worth your time. So overall, I crunched the numbers, and if you are budgeting right, if you're doing all the right things, eating cheaply, sleeping cheaply, $35 US should see you comfortably have a good holiday in Ecuador. Now, before I go, I'm going to jump into some hot takes. The best, the worst, what to do, some top tips. Let's go. The best, I've already said it for me, was the Quilatoa Loop. I've also loved Cuenca. I've stayed here for 2 weeks doing Spanish, and for me that's been one of the cutest and coolest little experiences. Cuenca is easily the best city in Ecuador, and although it has been somewhat gringo-fied, as they say, I found it really comfortable, loved the colonial architecture, and felt incredibly safe. I must say, I haven't mentioned it yet, the biggest expense for one of my activities, if you call it an activity, was going to a Spanish school here in Cuenca. So I attended the Llana Puma Spanish School, and for roughly $6 per hour, in a group setting, we basically spoke Spanish for 4 hours each day. I had a teacher who went through every verb and every conjugation, every tense possible, and kind of every combination possible for 36 hours over 2 weeks. So that equaled out to roughly $200 US. But being at the start of my trip and wanting to learn Spanish as badly as I do, it was worth it. I loved my teacher, I loved the school, cannot highly recommend Llana Puma Spanish School enough. I'll even chuck one of their links in the description if you're interested, but that for me became one of my favourite activities alongside Quilatoa that I did. I also think that's probably why my costs stayed down. If you're going to stay 2 weeks in a town, there goes your transport, there goes, you know, just those little things in between that you're spending money on. So I think that's why Ecuador for me was cheaper, which is funny because a lot of people say it can be expensive, so you just got to kind of pick and choose what you're doing and make sure you're working on a timeline that works for you. Another best thing for me was the highlands, just generally. The Andes is great, and all the villages there, yeah, can't recommend them enough. The bad, I've actually got to say that the cities other than Cuenca are kind of bad. Quito is dangerous. I hear many things that Guayaquil is dangerous. Yeah, as soon as the sun goes down you don't really want to be there, and it definitely feels in the street that it's got a vibe, so I definitely recommend being careful in those cities. Also talking about the food, generally the Ecuadorian cuisine is passable but not fantastic. I'm expecting a lot more things from Peruvian and Colombian food, but I gotta say that generally it was passable but it wasn't exceptional, so keep that in mind. And now just quickly I'm going to jump into my top tips for Ecuador. My number one top tip that I wish I knew before I came here is that they actually give out free yellow fever vaccines, which is astonishing. Back in Australia I think I paid 80 Australian dollars, so around 60 US, and I hear that there's a shortage in the US and people are paying up to 300 per shot. It's a pretty liberal country here and their health system seems to be fantastic, so even for tourists, if you rock up to one of the health campuses or hospitals, they will give you a free yellow fever vaccine, so easily that's my number one tip to tourists coming to Ecuador. Number two, this is for people not from the States, but keep in mind though it says dollars, they're not Australian dollars, they're not Canadian dollars. I kept getting into the fallacy that I was paying, you know, pretty cheap prices, and then I tack on an extra 20% to make it Australian dollars. So if you're not from the States, keep in mind they use the American dollar and it's not going to be the same as the Aussie dollar. Lastly, I'm going to say learn some Spanish before you come. I tried to with Duolingo, but if possible, do a few classes at home, speak to Spanish people at home, do whatever you can online, as much as you can online before you get here, because you know, I just kind of wish that I hadn't wasted time at home and learnt more Spanish, because now that I'm here, super useful. Ecuadorians don't really speak that much English, and if you want to learn Spanish, have that good foundation and then come here, because if they all speak Spanish and you've got no other choice, it's a really cool way to learn. Overall, I've loved my month here, but I'm also ready to get out of Cuenca, ready to tackle Peru, and on to Mancora. Let's give it a go. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you have any tips or ideas or things you thought about Ecuador, leave them in the bloody comments.